The blizzard screamed its fury against the walls of my lonely cabin, a sound so constant it had become a part of my silence. I was Elara, the last of my pack, an omega living on the forgotten edge of the wilding wood. My existence was one of quiet solitude, a peace earned through painful exile. Tonight, however, the storm felt different. It felt alive. Wrapping my worn shawl tighter, I peered through the frost-etched glass, seeing nothing but a swirling wall of white. Then I heard it, not the wind, a whimper. So faint, so broken, it was a stitch of pain in the symphony of the gale. My heart, a dormant thing for so long, gave a single, hard thump. I told myself it was the old wood settling, the ice cracking on the river far below. But the sound came again. A chorus of whimpers now, threaded with a suffering so profound it clawed at my very soul. They were out there. Without my cloak, without a second thought for the biting cold, I threw open the heavy door. The wind nearly ripped it from its hinges, blasting me with a cold that stole my breath. And there, in the weak halo of my doorway's light, I saw them. Eyes, dozens of eyes, glowing like desperate embers in the dark. Wolves. Not shifters, not yet, but great, majestic beasts, their fur matted with ice, their proud frames shivering and sunk deep into the mounting drifts. They were dying. An alpha, a massive creature with a scar running over one eye, met my gaze. In his silver depths, I saw no threat, only a plea that shattered my last reservation. An Omega's purpose is to serve, to heal, to preserve the pack, even a pack that is not her own. Come, I whispered, my voice lost to the wind. I stepped back, holding the door wide. Please come in. One by one, they dragged their frozen bodies over my threshold, a river of gray and white and black, their pelts brushing my legs, their cold noses touching my hand in fleeting thanks. They filled the main room of my small cabin, a living, breathing carpet of weary magic. The last to enter was the scarred alpha. He paused, lowering his great head in a gesture of profound respect before stepping inside. I worked through the night, stoking the fire, melting snow for water, using my meager stores of dried meat and herbs to make a thin, strengthening broth. I tended to cracked paws and frost-nipped ears, my omega nature humming with a purpose I had not felt in years. As dawn's first gray light bled through the windows, the wolves slept, their breathing deep and steady. Exhausted, I finally slept too, curled in my chair by the hearth. I was awoken not by sound, but by a silence. A heavy, absolute silence. The storm had ceased. And then a new sound began. A low, rhythmic thrumming that made the pottery on my shelves shiver. It was the sound of marching. Of many, many feet. My blood turned to ice. I crept to the window, my breath catching. Surrounding my cabin, standing in a perfect, terrifying circle in the fresh snow, was an army of warriors. They were not in wolf form, but as men, tall and armored in leather and fur, their expressions grim and unyielding. And at their head, before my very door, stood a man who could only be a king. He was a giant, taller and broader than any shifter I had ever seen, with hair the color of winter oak and eyes that held the storm he had somehow silenced. He stared directly at my cabin, at my door, his gaze a physical weight. The Giant Lycan King's army had come, and they had stopped right outside my door. The air in my cabin grew thick, charged with a tension sharper than the winter cold. The wolves around me began to stir, not with panic, but with a wary alertness. The scarred alpha, who I had started to think of as Sila's, rose to his feet, placing his massive body between me and the door. A low growl rumbled in his chest, not of aggression, but of warning. That single sound broke the spell of my terror. They were my guests, my responsibility. My pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs, but I forced my legs to move. I smoothed my simple dress, took a breath that did nothing to calm me, and reached for the iron bolt on my door. My hand trembled. The memory of my own pack's rejection, the sting of being cast out for my gentle, healing nature, a weakness, they called it, flooded back. Now another alpha, the greatest of them all, stood outside. What would he see? An omega meddling in affairs beyond her station? A fool who dared shelter another alpha's wolves? I pulled the door open. The cold morning light hit my face, but it was nothing compared to the gaze of the Lycan King. Up close, he was even more immense. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge, a raw, untamed force that made my omega instincts scream to lower my eyes, to bare my throat. I did not. I held my ground, my fingers gripping the doorframe for support. His eyes, a startling, fierce blue, swept past me, taking in the scene inside. 20 of his finest warriors, vulnerable and healing on the floor of an Omega's hut. His expression was unreadable, carved from stone. Who are you? His voice was deep, a vibration that I felt in my bones. I am Elara, I said, and was surprised to hear my voice steady. I shelter here. You sheltered them, he stated, his gaze returning to me, piercing. You opened your door to strange wolves in a killing storm. Why? The question was a test. I lifted my chin a fraction. The storm was killing them, and Omega's duty is to preserve life. I did my duty. A flicker of something, surprise, passed through his stormy eyes. He took a single step forward, and his army behind him tensed as one. Silas's growl deepened from behind me. The king's attention snapped to him. Silas, the king said, and the name was both a command and an acknowledgement. You led your patrol into a trap. The ice floe was a known hazard. Your arrogance nearly cost 20 lives. His words were for Silas, but his eyes were back on me, as if assessing my reaction to his harsh judgment. We were chasing the frost wraiths that harried the northern border, my king. Silas's voice, rough from disuse and cold, came from behind my shoulder. He had shifted, a naked, powerful man now nailing amidst the wolves, his head bowed but his voice firm. The intelligence was flawed. The storm came faster than any natural weather. The king's jaw tightened. Frost wraiths, that dark, magic-twisted creatures were so close to my woods sent a new chill through me. The king's focus returned to me, unwavering. You took a great risk, Elara. These wolves are not gentle creatures. The cold could have driven them mad with hunger. You could have been their first meal. I met his gaze, a spark of defiance igniting in my chest. They asked for help with their eyes, Your Majesty, and I answered. They threatened no one, they honored the sanctuary offered. For a long, terrifying moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, filled only by the soft crunch of snow as his warriors shifted their weight. Then he gave a single, slow nod. They did, and you honored the old ways which many have forgotten. He turned his head slightly, addressing his second in command, a stern-faced man with eyes like flint. Kale, have the healers attend to the patrol. Gently, they have been through an ordeal. He looked back at me, and his next words turned my world upside down. As for you, Elara of the Wilding Wood, you have saved a core part of my fighting strength. This debt must be settled. You will return with us to the Stone Peak Fortress. It was not a request, it was a decree. My sanctuary, my peaceful exile was over. Panic, cold and slick, coiled in my stomach. Leave my cabin, my woods, the only haven I'd known after my banishment. Your Majesty, I am grateful, but there is no debt. I require no payment. My place is here. My words sounded small, foolish even to my own ears. The king, King Theron, I heard his men call him, simply watched me, his head tilted as if listening to a distant sound. Your place, he said, his voice dropping so only I could hear, is currently at the center of a mystery. Silas's patrol was lured. The storm was manipulated. Someone or something wanted them dead, lost where no one would find their bodies. And then an Omega, living alone in the exact path of their retreat, saves them all. His blue eyes held mine, and in them I saw not suspicion, but a stark, grim certainty. You were not just in their path, Elara. You were their only possible shelter for miles. That is not coincidence, it is design. And until I know whether that design was meant to save them or to ensnare you, you are not safe here. His logic was a trap, inescapable and terrifying. Ensnare me? A nobody Omega. The idea was ludicrous, yet the conviction in his voice was absolute. Behind him, his warriors were already moving with efficient grace, creating makeshift stretchers for the wolves still too weak to walk, melting snow with their own body heat to create drinking water. They were a machine, powerful and precise. I had no choice. To refuse a Lycan King was unthinkable. To refuse this Lycan King, with his army at my door and a hidden enemy in the shadows, was a death wish. I need to gather a few things, I whispered, my defiance crumbling. He nodded, stepping back to give me space. Inside, the cabin was a flurry of quiet activity. The wounded wolves were being tended to with a reverence that surprised me. Silas, now dressed in borrowed garments, approached me as I numbly collected my herb pouch, my mother's woven blanket, my few precious books on healing. Elara, he said, his voice low. Thank you. He is right, you know. The storm, it chased us towards you. It herded us like sheep. We felt a presence in the wind, a malice. He shuddered. The king does not act without reason. Stonepeak is the strongest fortress in the north. If there is a threat, you will be protected there. Protected or imprisoned? The thought whispered through my mind. I followed the procession out of my cabin, locking the door with a sense of finality. King Theron waited astride a huge, dark horse. Another horse, a gentle-looking dappled mare, stood beside him. For me, the journey to Stonepeak was a blur of stark, breathtaking landscapes and chilling realizations. We moved fast. Theron's men were like ghosts on the wind, silent and swift. I was placed in the center of the column, surrounded at all times, not as an honored guest, but as a package to be guarded. Theron himself rode ahead, a silent, brooding sentinel, but I often felt his gaze flick back to me, checking, assessing. On the second day, as we traversed a high mountain pass, it happened. A section of the cliff path ahead, weakened by what seemed like recent, targeted erosion, gave way beneath two scouts. They fell with a cry that was cut short by a sickening crash below. The column halted in shock. But before anyone could react, a wave of unnatural cold swept down from the peaks above, a cold that smelled of damp earth and forgotten malice. From the shadows of the rocks, spectral figures emerged. Frost wraiths. Their forms were half solid, their eyes hollow pits of hunger. They didn't go for the warriors. They flowed like mist straight towards the center of the column, straight towards me. A scream caught in my throat. Then a roar split the air. Theron shifted mid-leap, his human form exploding into that of a colossal, silver-white wolf, larger than any I had ever imagined. He landed between me and the wraiths, his fury a tangible force. But the wraiths were not solid. His claws passed through them. They laughed, a sound like cracking ice, and reached for me with incorporeal hands. An instinct, ancient and pure, surged within me. It wasn't fight or flight, it was soothe. I didn't raise my hands. I simply looked at the leading wraith, and from the very core of my Omega spirit, I projected a wave of pure, calming peace, a negation of their chaotic malice. The wraith shrieked not in anger, but in confusion. Its form flickered, it was working. But the effort was draining me instantly, a river of energy pouring from my soul. My vision began to darken at the edges. The last thing I saw before the void took me was Theron, in his giant wolf form, turning his fierce, intelligent eyes from the disoriented wraiths to my collapsing form. And in those eyes, I saw not just fury, but a dawning, profound shock. I awoke to the scent of pine and hearth smoke, and the soft give of a fur-lined bed. The air was still and warm, a stark contrast to the deadly cold of the pass. My body felt hollow, drained, as if I'd run for days without rest. Blinking, I found myself in a spacious chamber with walls of smooth gray stone. A high, narrow window showed a sliver of twilight sky. This was Stonepeak. I tried to sit up, and a wave of dizziness forced me back down. Easy now. A calm, feminine voice spoke from the corner. A woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair rose from a chair, approaching me with a cup of steaming liquid. Drink this, it will restore your strength. The wraiths, the king, I managed to croak. All is well for now, she said, helping me sip the bitter, revitalizing tea. I am Marin, head healer of Stonepeak. You've been asleep for a full day. You pushed your gift to its brink, child. My gift, so they knew. Omegas had varied talents, some fostered harmony, some healed physical wounds. Mine had always been an empathy so strong I could feel the emotional pain of others, and with focus, Project Calm to soothe it. I'd never tried it on a creature of pure malice before. How did I stop them? I whispered. Marin's eyes grew thoughtful. Frost wraiths are born of rage and betrayal, spirits frozen in their moment of anguish. You didn't fight their magic. You offered its opposite, a fascinating application. The king has ordered you to be under my care and supervision. The way she said it hinted that this was both a protection and a confinement. As my strength slowly returned over the next day, I learned more from Marin. The fortress was a marvel of ancient Lycan engineering, built into the very bones of the mountain. The attack in the pass had changed things. Whispers followed me in the halls. I was no longer just the stray Omega who'd saved a patrol. I was the one who'd faced frost wraiths and lived, the one who'd done something even the king's warriors could not. On the third morning, the summons came. King Theron requested my presence in the war hall. Marin helped me into a simple, clean dress of deep blue wool. Remember, she said softly, you stand as an omega of worth. You have saved lives. Let no one, not even the king, make you feel otherwise. The war hall was a vast, intimidating space, its walls lined with banners and maps. Theron stood before a great stone table, studying a parchment. He was in his human form, but the power was still there, restrained but undeniable. He looked up as I entered, and for a moment the formal mask slipped. I saw the weariness in his eyes, the weight of kingship. Elara, you look restored. Thank you, your majesty. Marin's care has been kind. He gestured for me to approach the table. We have analyzed the attack site. The path was deliberately weakened. The wraiths were waiting, specifically for our column. For you? He pointed to a map. Your cabin is here. The trap was set here, on the only route from your location to Stonepeak. Someone knew I would bring you. Someone wanted to intercept us. The revelation was a physical blow. But who and why, I am no one. Theron's gaze was piercing. You are someone who saved 20 of my best fighters. You are someone who can repel frost wraiths with a feeling. That makes you a threat to whoever orchestrated this. It also makes you a weapon. I recoiled. I am not a weapon, I am a healer. In times of war, the line blurs, he said, his voice grim. I will not force you to fight, Elara, but I need to understand your ability. We must know its limits for your own protection and for ours. Before I could answer, the hall doors burst open. Kale, the stern second, strode in, his face etched with urgency. He shot a glance at me, then addressed Theron. My king, scouts have returned from the western timberline. They found a symbol carved into the ash trees, a fresh carving. Theron went very still. Show me. Kale laid a piece of bark on the table. Burned into it was a complex, twisting sigil, a serpent coiled around a broken sword. Theron's hand clenched into a fist, the knuckles white. The serpent's brand, he breathed, the name laden with venom and something else, dread. I thought that cult was eradicated generations ago. They were, Kale said, his voice tight, but the symbol is undeniable, and the carving was placed to be found. It's a message. Theron's stormy eyes lifted from the brand and locked onto mine. The serpents believed in harvesting unique lichen gifts, twisting them to their own ends. They sought power sources like a heartstone. My blood ran cold. Every lichen knew of heartstones, the rare inner core of power that some, usually alphas, possessed. But they were a myth, weren't they? You think they think I have one? I whispered. Theron's expression was answer enough. Your ability is unlike any Omega talent I've seen. It doesn't just soothe, it disrupts dark magic. To them, that would signal a power worth stealing. The trap at the pass wasn't to kill you. It was a test, and you passed it spectacularly. He straightened the king once more. The game has changed, Elara. You are not a pawn, you are the prize, and the serpents have just announced they are playing for keeps. The war hall felt suddenly colder. The symbol on the bark seemed to pulse with a malevolent life of its own. A cult from dark legends thought I possessed a mythical power source, and they were willing to start a war with the Lycan King to get it. The solitude of my cabin now seemed a paradise lost. What do we do? My voice was barely audible. Theron's gaze was fixed on the map, his mind racing down paths I couldn't see. We use their arrogance against them. They've shown their hand. They want you, and they believe their ancient methods will frighten us. He looked at Kale. Double the patrols on all borders. I want every symbol, every whisper of the serpent's brand investigated, but quietly. We do not spread panic. Kale nodded and left with swift efficiency. Theron then turned his full attention to me. You will begin training with Marin, not just healing. You must learn to shield your own emotions, your own energy. If they can sense you, they can find you. A heartstone, real or perceived, would shine like a beacon to those who know how to look. Training, the word was foreign. My Omega skills had always been intuitive, a reflex of the heart, not a discipline of the mind. I will try, I said, feeling utterly inadequate. You will do more than try, he said, but his tone wasn't harsh. It was charged with a fierce protectiveness that surprised me. You survived the wilds alone. You faced a horde of wraiths without a weapon. There is a strength in you, Elara. We just need to forge it into armor. In the days that followed, my world shrank to the healer's quarters and a secluded, walled garden within the fortress. Marin was a patient but exacting teacher. Your empathy is a two-way stream, she explained, her hands guiding mine as we sat amidst fragrant herbs. You feel others, but you also broadcast. To shield, you must imagine a barrier not of stone, but of still water. A mirror surface that reflects back any probe, showing nothing of the depths beneath. It was agonizingly difficult. My instinct was always to open, to connect, to soothe. To wall myself off felt like a betrayal of my very nature. More than once, I collapsed with a headache that felt like my skull was splitting. But slowly, incrementally, I began to feel a shimmering curtain fall within my mind. During this time, I saw Theron only at a distance, a commanding figure reviewing troops or striding through the courtyards. Yet, I often felt a peculiar awareness, a sense of being watched over. Once, after a particularly grueling session, where I'd finally managed to hold my shield for a full minute, I looked up to see him standing in the arched entrance to the garden. He said nothing, just gave a single, slow nod of approval before melting back into the shadows of the keep. It was a small gesture, but it fueled my determination more than any praise. Silas, now fully recovered, visited often, bringing tales of the fortress and its people. He became a friend, a bridge between my isolated existence and the bustling life of Stone Peak. "The men respect you, you know," he said one afternoon as we walked the inner battlements. "They call you the Hearth Omega. You brought their brothers in from the cold." The title warmed me, but it also felt like a mask. I wasn't a warrior. I was a frightened woman with a target on her back. A week after the symbol was found, the first direct attack came, not with wraiths or armies, but with poison. It was in the communal stew served to the garrison, a subtle, scentless toxin that induced a fevered paralysis. Marin and I worked for 2 straight nights, using every ounce of our knowledge. I used my empathy not to soothe, but to trace the poison's chilling path through their bodies, guiding Marin's antidotes with pinpoint accuracy. We saved everyone, but it was a close thing. As I washed the last of the herbal stains from my hands, Theron found me in the healer's supply room. His face was grim, etched with a fury he kept tightly leashed. "The cook's assistant is missing, a young man new to the fortress. He was seen talking to a trader from the south a few days ago. The serpents are inside the walls," I stated, the horror a cold stone in my gut. "They are testing our defenses, our resolve, and your abilities," he said. He stepped closer, the confined space making his presence overwhelming. "Elara, what you did here, it was more than healing. You were a compass in the dark. That is a strategic power." He hesitated, a conflict warring in his eyes. "I must ask more of you. I must ask you to be more than a healer in a room. I need to know if you can sense this taint of betrayal from a distance, before it strikes again." He was asking me to become a hunter of malice. To use my gift as a weapon, after all. I thought of the stricken warriors, their faces clammy with sweat. I thought of the missing boy, likely another victim. My fear crystallized into a hard, sharp resolve. "Show me where the traitor was lodged," I said, my voice steady. "Take me to the last place the poisoner walked. I will try." Theron's eyes blazed with a fierce, proud light. That night, under the cloak of darkness, he took me to a small, empty chamber in the servants' quarters. The room was clean, barren. But as I knelt on the stone floor, lowered my carefully maintained shields just a fraction, and opened my empathy, I felt it. A lingering residue, like the slime trail of a slug. It was a feeling of greed and fear, and a twisted sense of fanatical purpose. It led like a faint, foul thread out of the room, down a back stair, and towards a forgotten postern gate in the lowest part of the fortress wall. "Here," I whispered, pointing to the gate, my fingers trembling not with weakness, but with the revulsion of the touch. Theron's hand closed gently around my wrist, steadying me. His touch was warm, grounding. "Good," he murmured, his voice a low rumble in the dark. "Very good." He looked from the gate to me, and in the moonlight his expression was unreadable. "We set a watch here. And tomorrow, Elara, your training changes. We're not just building a shield anymore. We're going to teach you how to send that sense of yours out like a net. If the serpents want to play with shadows, we will give them a light they cannot extinguish." The game had changed again. I was no longer just a prize to be guarded. I was becoming a key part of Stone Peak's defense. And the realization, instead of terrifying me, ignited a small, steady flame of purpose. I was an Omega, and I would protect my pack. The days blurred into a new, intense rhythm. My world became a tapestry of scent, sensation, and silent vigilance. Under Theron's direct supervision, often in the quiet, pre-dawn hours when the fortress slept. My training shifted. Marin continued to fortify my mental shields, but with the king, I learned to cast my empathy outward, like a fisherman's line into a dark sea. Do not seek individuals, he instructed, his voice a calm anchor in the stone-lined training cellar. Seek the emotion that does not belong. Seek the stain of deceit or the fever burn of fanaticism. It was exhausting. Feeling the collective mood of the fortress was overwhelming. The simmering anxiety of the guards, the warm contentment from the kitchens, the playful focus from the training yards. Finding a single discordant note felt impossible. More than once, I ended the sessions with a nosebleed, my mind pushed to its limits. But Theron was always there, not with soft words, but with a steadfast presence. He would hand me a cloth for the blood, a cup of water, and simply say, again. His belief in my capacity was absolute, a wall against my own doubt. It was Sila's who provided the necessary respite. He began taking me on walks along the highest, windswept battlements, where the air was clean and the emotions were simple: sky, stone, and solitude. You're carrying the weight of the entire mountain on your shoulders, Elara, he said one evening as we watched the sunset bleed across the peaks. Even the king delegates. You must learn what to hold on to and what to let the wind take. I was learning. The fortress was becoming familiar, its heartbeat a constant rhythm in my own chest. I started recognizing the warriors I'd helped save, who now greeted me with deep, respectful nods. I was no longer just the Hearth Omega, I was becoming a part of Stonepeak. Then, the second test came. It began with a nightmare. Not my own, a wave of collective terror so vivid it jolted me from sleep. I sat up, gasping, my heart hammering. It came from the western barracks. I didn't think. I threw on a cloak and ran, barefoot, through the cold stone corridors. I burst into the long hall to find a scene of chaos. Dozens of warriors were thrashing in their bunks, trapped in violent night terrors, their faces contorted in fear, some crying out. Those unaffected shook their comrades, trying in vain to wake them. Theron arrived only moments after me, his expression thunderous. A waking nightmare spell, a serpent specialty. He looked at me, and in his eyes was a question and a command. I didn't need to cast my net. The emotion was a suffocating fog in the room, pure weaponized dread. My healing instincts surged forward. This was a wound, just one of the spirit. I moved to the center of the room, ignoring the cold stone on my feet. I closed my eyes, and instead of building my shield, I tore it down. I opened myself completely to the terror, letting it wash through me. It was agony. I felt their fear of dying alone, of failing their king, of the dark, of the wraiths. I took it all in, a poisoned chalice. Then, from the well of my Omega nature, I began to pour it back out, transformed. I projected calm, safety, the unshakable solidity of the mountain beneath us, the warmth of a steadfast hearth. I imagined a mother's lullaby, a century's reliable watch, a pack's united strength. One by one, the thrashing ceased. The cries faded into ragged breaths, then into deep, peaceful sleep. The spell was broken. The effort dropped me to my knees. I was empty, a vessel shattered. Theron was there in an instant, catching me before I hit the floor. He lifted me easily, cradling me against his chest. Through a haze, I felt the solid beat of his heart, saw the stark worry etched on his face as he looked down at me. "You fool," he whispered, but his voice was thick with awe, not anger. "You glorious, self-sacrificing fool." He carried me from the barracks, not to the healer's quarters, but to his own chambers. He laid me on a couch by a massive fireplace, wrapping me in blankets that smelled of him, oak moss and frost. He didn't leave. He sat in a chair opposite, watching me as color slowly returned to my world. They attacked their minds, I finally rasped, because their bodies were too well guarded. Yes, he said, his voice low, and you were the only shield that could stop it. They weren't testing our security this time, Elara. They were testing you, measuring the range and depth of your gift. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. And now they know its cost. You burn yourself to fuel it. A cold deeper than the wraith's touch seeped into me. I'm a liability. If I fall, the fortress falls with me. Theron's gaze was fierce. No, you are our greatest strength, and I will not let you fall. He stood, pacing before the fire. The game changes again. We do not wait for the next attack. We use the trail you found. We find the serpent hiding in our shadow, and we cut the head from the snake. The plan was born in the quiet intensity of Theron's chambers. It was risky, a gambit that hinged entirely on me. I was to be the bait, but a bait that could see the hook. We would publicly announce a reconnaissance mission to my old cabin, citing the need to retrieve vital omega herbs for the fortress's defenses. It was a plausible reason. I would travel with a small, elite guard, Silas and 5 others. Thuron and the main force would shadow us at a distance, hidden, ready to strike. The traitor will see this as the perfect opportunity, Thuron explained, his finger tracing the route on the map. You, outside the walls with a minimal guard, they will move to intercept, to capture. And when they do, we will have them. The thought of leaving Stone Peak's safety made my hands clammy, but the memory of the warriors' nightmare-twisted faces steeled my resolve. I can do it. The night before the departure, I couldn't sleep. I slipped out to the walled garden, seeking the solace of the moonlit herbs. I didn't hear him approach, but I felt his presence, a calming, powerful steadying of the air. You should be resting, Thuron said, coming to stand beside me. So should you, I replied softly. He gave a quiet, humorless chuckle. Kings rest when their people are safe. He was silent for a long moment. This plan, it puts you in more danger than anyone. If you have any doubt, say the word, we will scrap it. I looked up at him. In the silver light, he looked less like an untouchable king and more like a man carrying a world of burdens. My doubt doesn't matter. The necessity does. I trust your strategy, and I trust Sela's. But do you trust me? The question was blunt, Ra. I met his storm blue eyes. Yes, Thuron, I do. My use of his name without title hung between us. Something shifted in his gaze, a wall crumbling to reveal a profound, vulnerable sincerity. When this is over, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, when the shadow is gone, things will be different. For the fortress, for me. He didn't elaborate, he didn't need to. The promise in his words was clear, and it sent a tremor through me that had nothing to do with fear. He reached out slowly and tucked a stray strand of my hair behind my ear. His touch was feather-light, a brand of warmth. Then he was gone, melting back into the darkness of the keep. The journey out was tense. Every rustle of leaves, every bird's cry felt like a potential attack. My empathy was stretched taut, a live wire humming with the anxiety of my guards and the deceptive peace of the forest. Silas stayed close, a constant, reassuring presence. We reached my cabin by midday. It stood undisturbed, a lonely sentinel. A pang of homesickness hit me, sharp and surprising. While the guards secured the perimeter, I went inside, gathering the herbs I actually did need. The familiar scents of pine and dried lavender should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a memory from another life. As I stepped back outside, my net brushed against it, a coil of anticipation, sharp and cruel, hidden in the tree line south of the cabin. It was the same slimy residue I felt in the servant's room, but stronger, focused. Silas, I said, my voice low. South tree line, 3, maybe 4. They're waiting. He gave a barely perceptible nod, his hand going to his weapon. He signaled the guards. We moved as planned, mounting up and beginning to ride back towards Stone Peak, but on a path that would take us closer to the ambush point. The attack came in a whirlwind of snarls and snapping jaws. Not men, but wolves, massive, disciplined, and eyes glazed with a strange, fervid gleam. They ignored the guards, converging on me with single-minded purpose. My horse reared in panic. Silas and his men fought with brutal efficiency, but they were outnumbered. A tawny wolf broke through, its jaws aiming for my horse's leg to bring me down. I didn't think. I slammed down my shields, hardening them into a wall, and then pushed a pulse of pure, disorienting calm directly at the beast. It yelped, stumbling mid-leap, confusion shattering its focus. A guard's spear took it in the flank. Then a new sound erupted, the thunder of many paws. Theron's hidden force poured from the forest, a silver tide led by the giant Lycan King himself. The battle turned in an instant, but as the serpent wolves were subdued, I felt it again, not from the forest, but from the cabin itself. A solitary, triumphant malice. The traitor wasn't in the woods, they'd been inside my home. I wheeled my horse around and galloped back to the cabin, Silas shouting after me. I threw open the door. There, standing by my cold hearth, was Marin. Her kind eyes were gone, replaced by a fanatic's cold light. In her hand was a jagged, dark crystal that pulsed with stolen energy, the focus for the nightmare spell, I was sure. "Hello, dear," she said, her voice still sweet, horribly familiar. "I knew you'd come back. The king's plan was so obvious, but he never considered the healer, did he? The one who tended you, who knew the exact limits of your strength." She smiled. "The serpent thanks you for your service. Your heartstone will usher in a new age." Betrayal, cold and absolute, hollowed me out. Marin. The woman who had comforted me, taught me, whose hands had helped me save lives. The weight of her deceit was a physical sickness. "The herbs, the poison, the nightmares," I stammered, my back against the doorframe. "All necessary steps," she said, stepping forward, the crystal glowing malevolently. "To study you, to weaken the pack's spirit, to isolate you. A heartstone's power is greatest when claimed from a subject in a state of profound distress. Your sacrifice today will be a gift." I had no physical weapon. My empathy was frayed from the battle and the shock. I could feel her emotion now, a twisted tapestry of zealous belief and cold, calculating greed. She was a void where compassion should have been. "I don't have a heartstone," I said, my voice shaking. "Your modesty is charming," she chuckled. The disruption of primal magic, the healing of poisoned minds, only a latent heartstone could grant an omega such power. The legends are clear. She raised the crystal. A dark tendril of energy lashed out from it, not at my body, but at my spirit. It was an attack of pure despair, designed to break my will. I cried out, my knees buckling as images flooded me. Theron falling, Silas betrayed, Stonepeak in flames, my lonely cabin ashes. But within that torrent of manufactured despair, I found an anchor. Not my power, my truth. I thought of the scarred wolves trusting me at my door, of Silas's respectful friendship, of the warriors' grateful nods, of Theron's hand steadying my wrist in the dark, his promise in the moonlit garden, the look in his eyes as he called me a fool. I was not a power source, I was Elara. With a gasp, I stopped fighting the despair. I let it in, and then I answered it not with a counterspell, but with a memory. I projected the feeling of a warm hearth on a frozen night. The solid safety of Stone Peak's walls, the unbreakable bond of a pack that had become my own. I showed her what she had betrayed, what she would never understand. The dark tendril flickered. The crystal's pulse stuttered. Marin's confident smile faltered. "What are you doing?" "Showing you what a real heart looks like." I gritted out, pushing to my feet. The door crashed open behind me. Theron filled the space, shifted back to his human form, blood streaking his armor, his fury a living force. He took in the scene in an instant. Marin's face contorted. She shrieked, channeling all the crystal's energy into a final, concentrated blast of psychic agony aimed directly at Theron's mind. I didn't think. I threw myself not in front of him, but into the path of the attack with my empathy wide open. I caught the full force of the mental blast. It was like being struck by lightning made of nightmares. The world exploded into white, silent pain, but I was an omega, a vessel made for bearing emotion. I did not try to deflect it. I took it, all of it. The crystal shattered with an ear-splitting shriek as its stored malice flooded into me. The last thing I heard was Theron's roar of anguish, and the last thing I saw was Marin's look of stunned horror before darkness swallowed me whole. I existed in a formless, gray haze. There was no pain, only a profound, echoing emptiness. Distantly, I was aware of voices, of warmth, of hands, but they were echoes from the other side of a deep, still lake. She absorbed the full corruption of a soul stone. Brain is protecting itself, won't wake up. The voice that cut through the fog most clearly was his. It was ragged, stripped of all kingly authority, reduced to a raw, desperate plea. Fight, Elara, come back to us, come back to me. That is an order from your king. And softer, a broken whisper, please. Time had no meaning. But slowly, like the first meltwater of spring, feeling began to return. I became aware of a gentle, constant pressure on my hand, a large, warm hand holding mine, and a familiar, grounding scent, oak moss and frost, and beneath it, fear and hope. I fought my way up through the layers of gray. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. With a gasp that tore at my dry throat, I opened my eyes. I was in a sun-filled room I didn't recognize, larger, airier than the healer's quarters. Theron was slumped in a chair next to the bed, asleep, his head resting on the mattress beside my hip, one hand firmly wrapped around mine. He looked exhausted, years older. I tried to speak, but only a croak emerged. The movement stirred him. His head snapped up, his eyes flying open, bloodshot and shadowed. When they met mine, the change in him was instantaneous. The exhaustion shattered, replaced by a wave of such naked, unguarded relief that it stole my breath. Elara. My name was a prayer on his lips. His hand tightened on mine. You're here. He helped me sip water, his movements infinitely careful. I learned I had been lost in the gray place for 9 days. Marin was in the dungeons, her fanaticism broken, revealing a network of serpent sympathizers that was being dismantled. The attack had, ironically, purified Stonepeak. The crystal, I rasped, destroyed, and you were right, he said, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. You have no heartstone. Our scholars now believe your power is something rarer. A pure Omega spirit, untainted and resilient. A mirror that reflects darkness as light. Marin's cult sought a weapon. They found their antithesis. He stayed with me as my strength returned, telling me of the fortress, of the renewed loyalty of the Pax. He spoke of plans for a new council, one that included voices from all ranks, including Omegas. He spoke of a future. One afternoon, as I sat by a window wrapped in blankets, he entered, his demeanor uncharacteristically hesitant. The pack, my people, they have a petition, he began, standing formally before me. They have seen your strength, your sacrifice, your heart. They know that their king, he stopped, struggling for words. The mighty Lycan King was nervous. He went down on one knee so our eyes were level. Elara of the Wilding Wood, you have saved my warriors, defended my home, and reclaimed my own spirit from cynicism. You do not just heal bodies, you heal packs. I cannot command this. I can only ask with all that I am. He took a deep breath. Will you stand by my side? Not as a weapon or a trophy, as my partner, as my Luna? The world stilled. I saw not just the king, but Theron. The man who carried his people's weight, who valued strength in all its forms, who had trusted me, protected me, and believed in me when I did not. I saw my future, not of solitude, but of purpose, not of hiding, but of leading with compassion. Tears filled my eyes, but they were tears of warmth, of a thawing joy. I placed my hand over his where it rested on the arm of the chair. My place, I said, echoing his words from that first fateful morning, is with my pack. My place is with you, Theron, yes. The smile that broke across his face was like the sun after a long winter. It was a promise of safety, of belonging, of a love as deep and steadfast as the mountain itself. The coronation was not in a grand hall, but under the open sky, on the highest peak of Stone Peak at dawn. The entire fortress gathered on the slopes below, a sea of hopeful faces. I wore not jewels, but a simple gown the color of the winter sky, and over it the pelt of the first wolf I had saved, Silas's gift, a symbol of trust earned. Thuron stood beside me, dressed in the ceremonial armor of his lineage, but his head was bare. The elder shaman spoke of balance, of strength tempered by mercy, of the fierce heart and the gentle paw. Then he turned to me. Elara, formerly of the Wilding Wood, do you vow to guard the heart of this pack? To be its shelter in the storm, its comfort in the dark, the voice of compassion in the council of power? I vow it, I said, my voice clear and carrying on the thin mountain air. He placed a simple silver circlet, wrought in the shape of intertwining wolf and vine, upon my brow. Then we name you Luna of the Stone Peak Pack. May your strength be our peace. A roar of approval rose from the gathered lichens, a sound that shook the very rock beneath us. It was not a roar for a conqueror, but for a healer, for a hearth. Thuron took my hand, lifting it high with his. Our union was sealed not with a kiss, but with a united stance before our people. Later, in the quiet of our shared chambers, I looked out over the kingdom now mine to help guide. Thuron came to stand behind me, his hands resting gently on my shoulders. It began with a door opened in a storm, he murmured into my hair, and ended with a pack united under the sun, I finished, leaning back into his solid strength. It hasn't ended, my Luna, he said. It has just begun. There were still challenges. The remnants of the serpent cult lurked in the shadows of the wider world. Leading a pack would bring complexities I could not yet imagine. But I was no longer alone. I was no longer just an Omega. I was Elara, the Luna who had been forged in a blizzard, tested by betrayal, and tempered by a love as unyielding as stone. My howl was no longer one of solitude, but a call to unity, answered by the mighty chorus of my pack, and by the steadfast heart of the giant Lycan King beside me. The piece of Stone Peak was a living thing, humming in the stones and in the hearts of its people. As Luna, my days were no longer my own, yet every duty felt like a blessing. I presided over healing circles, mediated minor disputes with an Omega's empathy, and sat beside Theron in council, offering the perspective of the hearth where he offered the strength of the sword. It was during one such council that the first thread of unease was pulled. A hunter from the Deepwood Marches, a territory on the far eastern edge of Theron's domain, stood before the high table, his scent ripe with fear and pine resin. "It's not right, my king, my Luna," he stammered, clutching his fur cap. "The woods, they've gone quiet. No bird call, no scuttling in the underbrush. The game is gone, not hunted, just absent, and the trees." He shuddered. "They look the same, but they feel watchful." Thuron leaned forward, his expression intent. "Watchful how?" "It's a feeling, majesty, a pressure." Like walking through a crowd with eyes on your back, but there's no one there. My son, Jaren, a reckless pup, ventured deeper 3 days ago to prove me a nervous old wolf. The hunter's voice broke. He hasn't returned. A chill that had nothing to do with the drafty hall crept up my spine. I opened my empathy, just a whisper. From the hunter, I tasted only stark, paternal terror. But as I let my senses drift towards the east, I felt it, a strange, muffled blankness where the vibrant pulse of the forest's life should have been. It wasn't malice like the serpent's touch. It was absence, a void. "We will find your son," I said, my voice cutting through the man's despair. The council members turned to me, some with respect, a few of the older alphas with barely veiled skepticism. My place was still being proven. A forest does not simply empty itself. Something has displaced the life there, and it has taken one of our pack. Theron's gaze met mine, fierce with pride and shared concern. "Silas," he commanded. "Ready a scout party, myself, the Luna, and 5 of your steadiest. We leave at first light." The decision to include me was not questioned aloud, but I felt the ripple of surprise. A Luna was a treasure to be guarded within strong walls, not marched into a silent, unknown wood. But Thuron understood what the traditionalists did not. I was not just a symbol to be protected. I was a tool to be wielded. If this sickness was of the spirit, a sword alone would not cure it. Our journey to the Deepwood Marches was swift. The change, when we reached its border, was immediate and jarring. One step from the chattering, lively birch forest into the marches, and the world dropped into a profound hush. The air was still and thick, deadening sound. The light filtered through the canopy in a pale, greenish way, like light through deep water. My empathy recoiled. It was like trying to listen in a room swathed in wool. I could feel my own party's alert tension, and Thuron's solid, reassuring presence beside me, but beyond us there was nothing. No flicker of insect thought, no drowsy consciousness of plants, no whisper of animal life. Just a vast, listening silence. "The trail is clear," Silas whispered, his voice absurdly loud in the quiet. He pointed to a set of recent footprints in the soft loam, a young man leading erratically deeper in. He was running, but not from anything behind him. He frowned. He was running towards something. We followed, the silence pressing on our ears. After an hour, we found the first sign of the wrongness. A magnificent old oak, its trunk was marbled with veins of something that was not bark. It looked like polished, gray stone, seeping into the living wood. The transformation seemed to pulse slowly, creeping upward. I reached out a hand, but Thuron caught my wrist. "Don't." But I didn't need to touch it. My empathy, straining against the void, brushed the edge of the petrified section. What I felt wasn't death, but a terrible, eternal stillness. A consciousness trapped, aware, and utterly paralyzed. A scream frozen in time. I gasped, snatching my senses back. "It's alive. The tree is still alive in there." Thuron's face was grim. "This is not natural blight. This is magic, old and deep." A desperate cry shattered the silence ahead, young, male, and filled with pure terror. "Stay back!" We ran. Bursting into a small clearing, we found Jaren. The young wolf was backed against another partially petrified tree, his body trembling, a knife held shakily before him. But he wasn't looking at us. He was staring, wide-eyed, at the center of the clearing. There, the forest floor was entirely stone, a smooth, gray disk, and standing upon it was a figure. It appeared as a woman woven from willow saplings and dried moss, her form elegant and impossibly tall. Her face was beautiful, but as emotionless as the stone beneath her feet. In her long, fibrous fingers, she cradled a small, sleeping sparrow, its tiny body already half transformed into a delicate gray figurine. She turned her head, and eyes the color of cold shale regarded us. When she spoke, her voice was the sound of rocks grinding deep underground. You bring noise, she said. You bring time. This place is for the quiet eternity. You will be still. You will be perfect. She raised her hand, not towards Jaren, but towards me. A wave of that profound, silencing stillness rolled from her, aimed at my spirit, seeking to extinguish the vibrant, empathetic energy that made me me. To turn the Luna's heart to stone. The wave of stillness hit me like a dive into an Arctic lake. It didn't attack with pain or nightmare, but with an insidious, overwhelming promise of peace. To stop feeling, to stop worrying, to stop hurting. To become as permanent and unchanging as the mountain. For a soul burdened with the emotions of a pack, the temptation was a whispered poison. My omega instinct screamed. This was the opposite of my purpose. I was a vessel for life, for feeling, for growth, not for this dead, perfect silence. I didn't try to shield. Instead, I did what I had done in the nightmare barracks. I anchored myself in the messy, beautiful chaos of being alive. I thought of the warmth of the hearth, the irritating itch of a healing wound, the joyful bark of a playing pup, the exhausting, wonderful weight of Theron's trust. I focused on the rapid, fearful beat of my own heart, a rhythm of time. I pushed that feeling outward, a small, defiant pulse of life against the tide of stillness. The waves shattered around me like glass against a ringing bell. The moss woman, the petrifier, I named her in my mind, recoiled, a flicker of something like surprise in her stony eyes. The sparrow in her hand completed its transformation, becoming a perfect, lifeless statue. You resist perfection, she intoned, her grinding voice curious. Your song is loud. I will learn its rhythm before I silence it. Theron moved. He didn't shift, but moved with such speed he was a blur. He placed himself bodily between me and the creature, his sword drawn. You will not touch her. The petrifier looked at him, then at his sword, with detached interest. Your edge is fleeting. It will dull. My touch is forever. She gestured languidly. From the stone disk at her feet, tendrils of gray shot out, not at Theron, but at the living ground around his feet. The grass, the roots, the very soil began to bleach of color and harden, racing up towards him. Theron, move! I screamed. He leapt back just as the petrification reached where his boots had been. The scout party spread out, but their uncertainty was palpable. How do you fight something that turns the world to stone? Silas tried a different tactic. He shifted into his wolf form and darted to the side, a gray streak aiming to flank her and pull Jaren to safety. The petrifier didn't even turn. She pointed a finger, and the air in front of Silas seemed to thicken and crystallize. He yelped, skidding to a halt, a sheen of gray stone frosting the fur on his chest. He shifted back to human form, the stone receding slightly but leaving angry, cracked skin behind. It wasn't just touch, she could project her power through the air. Fall back, Theron commanded, his voice a whip crack in the silent wood. To the forest edge, we retreated, grabbing the terrified Jaren. The petrifier did not pursue. She simply watched us go, returning her attention to the petrified clearing, as if we were mere distractions in her grand, silent work. Back at the vibrant border, the sound of wind and birds felt like a physical assault after the dead zone. Jaren sobbed out his story. He'd been drawn by a beautiful, haunting song no one else could hear, a lullaby of perfect peace. Dee walked willingly into her clearing, and only when he saw the petrified animals did terror break the spell. Theron's face was a mask of strategic fury. She turns the environment into a weapon and a shield. Arrows, teeth, claws are useless. We cannot even get close. My mind raced, still vibrating from the clash of our powers. She doesn't just turn things to stone, Theron. She sells them a dream. a promise of an end to pain, to change, to decay. She offered it to me. It's a lie, but a powerful one. I looked back at the unnaturally still tree line. She's not attacking the pack. She's curating, creating her own perfect, silent museum, and she's expanding. Then we contain her, Silas growled, applying a poultice to his chest. Build a wall, burn a fire break. Fire would not burn in that silence, I said, the intuition settling cold in my gut. And a wall of stone would just give her more material. This needs a healer's solution, not a soldier's. Theron turned to me. You broke her influence. How? I didn't fight the stillness, I affirmed life. The noise, the change, the time she hates, it's our weapon. I met his gaze, the plan forming as I spoke, terrifying in its implication. I have to get closer, not to fight her, but to converse, to show her the flaw in her perfection. Absolutely not, Theron said, the king's command in his voice. It is the only way, I replied, the Luna's resolve in mine. She is a disease of the spirit. You cannot cut it out. You must convince the body to reject it. Let me be the antibody. While I engage her, you and the others must do what she would never expect. Which is? Make noise, I said, a faint smile touching my lips. Unbearable, chaotic, joyful, irritating noise. Remind the forest of what it's losing. Don't attack her, attack the silence. Thuron stared at me, conflict raging in his eyes. Sending his heart into the heart of the stillness was every instinct screaming in protest. But he was a king who had learned the value of a different kind of strength. Finally, his shoulders slumped in acquiescence. You will have a cord tied to you, he said, his voice low and deadly serious. Not of rope, a tether of my will. If I feel you fading, if that stillness starts to take you, I will pull you out and we will find another way, even if I have to tear that forest down with my bare hands. The promise was a vow. I nodded, agreed. As the scouts began their work, gathering axes, drums, horns, and their own voices, Thuron took my face in his hands. He didn't speak. He simply poured his own essence into that tether, not a command, but a testament. A flood of images and feelings, the rough texture of Stone Peak's stone, the taste of fresh game, the sound of the pack's howl at moonrise, the warmth of our shared bed. It was a torrent of life, specific and beloved, anchoring me to him. When he released me, the connection thrummed between us, a silent, steady pulse. For the pack, he said. For the forest, I replied. I turned and walked back into the silent wood, alone, towards the petrifier's clearing, the distant, first tentative beats of a drum beginning to sound behind me. The silence was even heavier the second time, knowing its source. It pressed on my eardrums, a physical void. My empathy, starved for input, turned inward, clinging to the warm, vibrant tether connecting me to Thuron. I followed the thread of his will like a lifeline through fog. As I neared the clearing, the first sounds of the pack's attack began to seep in. Distant, muffled by the wood's deadening effect, but undeniably present. The rhythmic thump of a war drum, the sharp crack of an axe on a non-petrified tree, a chorus of raised voices not in a war cry, but in a rowdy, off-key hunting song. The effect on the environment was subtle but immediate. The oppressive stillness quivered, like the surface of a pond disturbed by a far-off stone. The gray veins in the trees seemed to pulse slower. I stepped into the clearing. The petrifier stood where we'd left her, but she was no longer serene. Her head was tilted, her stony brow faintly furrowed, as if listening to a discordant, irritating sound. You return, she said, her grinding voice holding a new edge. You bring the cacophony with you. It is a corruption. It is life, I said, keeping my voice calm, conversational. I stopped a dozen paces from the stone disk. Life is rarely a single, pure note. It is a symphony, sometimes joyful, sometimes sad, often loud and messy. Symphonies end, she countered, gesturing to the petrified sparrow in her palm. Silence is eternal. In stillness, there is no pain, no loss, no decay. I offer peace. What peace is there in being trapped, aware, but unable to grow? I asked, taking a careful step forward. I pointed to the half petrified oak. That tree feels the sun but cannot stretch towards it. It drinks rain but cannot send forth new leaves. You haven't given it peace, you've given it a prison. For the first time, she seemed to truly look at her handiwork, not with pride, but with contemplation. Growth leads to death. Change is loss. I stop the loss, but you also stop the joy. The words burst from me, fueled by the pulse from Theron's tether, by the distant, defiant drumbeat. You stop the taste of the first berry of summer. You stop the feeling of a cool breeze after a long run. You stop the comfort of a packmate's nuzzle, the pride of a skill mastered, the hope of a new dawn. I took another step, now at the very edge of the stone. You trade a story with 1,000 chapters, some sad, some glorious, for a single frozen cover. The drumming grew louder. Someone had added a shrill whistle. The petrifier flinched, a tiny stone-on-stone scrape of a movement. Your noise is an agony, she hissed. It is our proof of existence. I spread my arms, opening my empathy not to her, but to the forest around us, to the faint, fading echoes of life still trapped within the petrified things. I pushed through the stillness, not with a counterspell, but with memories. I sent the feeling of a sprouting seed pushing through soil, the frantic, happy heartbeat of a rabbit running, the deep, slow contentment of a mossy rock in the sun, the simple, uncomplicated love of a mother creature for its young. I showed her the story. A ripple went through the clearing. The petrified sparrow in her hand gave a microscopic shiver. A tiny fragment of stone fell from its wing, revealing a single, dusty brown feather beneath. The petrifier stared at it, stunned. This is not possible. My gift is permanent. Nothing is permanent, I said softly, taking the final step onto the stone disk. It was cold, sapping the warmth from my soles. Accept change. You are not a goddess of preservation. You are a spirit of fear, fear of endings. But by fearing the end, you are destroying the middle, the only part that truly matters. The cacophony from the woods reached a peak, drums, shouts, howls, the clashing of swords on shields in a frantic, joyful rhythm. It was the sound of a pack living. The petrifier cried out, a sound of grinding tectonic plates. The stone disk beneath us cracked. The veins on the trees began to recede, like frost melting before a strong sun. The process was slow, but it was reversing. But her despair turned to rage. If you will not have my peace, then share my torment. She lunged for me, not with petrifying magic, but with her physical, woody hands. Her touch was dry and bitingly cold. As her fingers closed around my forearm, the stillness invaded not my spirit, but my very blood. A creeping numbness, a grayness, began to crawl up from her touch, turning my skin to a cold, dead marble. Agony, not of pain, but of utter loss of sensation, lanced through me. I screamed, not in fear, but in protest. The tether to Theron snapped taut. I felt his roar of fury, not through the air, but through our bond. It was a sound of pure, protective life. And then he was there, not at the edge of the clearing, but in it. He had shifted, the giant silver-white wolf moving faster than thought. He did not bite or claw the petrifier. He barreled into her, a force of nature wrapped in fur and muscle, knocking her grasp from my arm. The connection broke. The petrification on my arm halted, leaving my hand and wrist a terrifying, mottled gray. Useless. Cold. Thuron stood over me, between me and the reeling petrifier, his lips pulled back in a snarl that promised not a clean death, but a violent, messy, living end. The petrifier looked from her own hands, where a single green leaf was now sprouting from a knuckle, to Theron's fierce, breathing vitality, to my defiant, pained face. She saw the symphony, and for the first time, she heard its beauty. With a final, grinding sigh that sounded like a mountain settling, she dissolved. Not into nothing, but into a shower of green moss, soft soil, and small, white flowers that sprinkled onto the now cracked and receding stone disk. The forest inhaled. And the sound that returned was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. The numbness in my arm was absolute. I could see the gray, stone like skin covering my hand and wrist, feel its dead weight, but there was no pain, no sensation of cold or warmth. It was as if that part of me had been neatly excised from the world of feeling. Thuron shifted back, his human face pale with a fear battle had never etched there. He tore a strip from his tunic and, with heartbreaking gentleness, wrapped my petrified hand, as if to protect it, or perhaps to hide the evidence of his failure to keep me safe. "It's all right," I said, my voice shaky. "It stopped. You stopped it." He didn't answer, just lifted me carefully into his arms. Around us, the deepwood marches were waking up. Birds tentatively chirped. Insects buzzed. The petrified veins on the trees were receding, leaving healthy bark behind. The hunter's son, Jaren, was sobbing with relief against Silas's shoulder. We returned to Stone Peak not as victors, but as survivors bearing a strange wound. The pack's celebration of the forest's healing was tempered by the sight of their Luna's shrouded arm. Marin's replacement, a capable healer named Anya, examined me in my chambers. Thuron stood like a statue in the corner, his guilt a cold ember in the room I could feel even without my empathy. "The flesh is not dead," Anya concluded, her fingers hovering over the gray skin. "It is suspended. The magic holds it in stasis. It is not spreading, but I know of no poultice or herb that can reverse such a thing. Can you feel anything?" Thuron's voice was rough. I closed my eyes, focusing. With my empathy turned inward, I could sense the life in my arm, the blood, sluggish but present, the nerves dormant. It was like a room in my own house where the door was locked from the outside. "It's there. It's just sleeping, trapped by the echo of her magic." The implications settled slowly. I could not hold a cup with that hand, could not feel Thuron's grip, could not tend to herbs or stroke a worried pup's head. For an Omega, for a healer whose power was rooted in connection and touch, it was a crippling blow. The council, when it met, was divided. Some saw it as a noble sacrifice. Others, the traditionalist alphas, saw it as a vulnerability. "The Luna is meant to be the heart of the pack," one grumbled. "A heart cannot be half stone. How can she project strength when she herself is fractured?" Thuron's growl silenced the room. "She projected enough strength to save the Deepwood and every fool who lives in it. Her fracture is a badge of honor, not a weakness. Any who see it otherwise answer to me." But his fierce defense couldn't stop the whispers or the pitying looks. Worse, it couldn't stop my own creeping doubt. That night, as I struggled one-handed to braid my hair for bed, a wave of frustration and despair finally broke over me. A hot tear fell onto the stone-like skin of my left hand. Thuron was there in an instant, taking the hair tie from my trembling fingers and finishing the braid with a surprising dexterity. He turned me to face him, his eyes searching mine. "I failed you," he said, the words ripped from him. "You saved me," I countered. "You saved everyone. At what cost?" He gestured to my arm. "My role is to protect, to shield the pack's heart, and I let it be wounded." "The heart isn't here," I said, placing my living hand over his chest. "And it isn't here," I placed it over my own. "It's between us. It's in the bonds we've built. This," I lifted my shrouded arm, "is not a wound to your kingship, Thuron." It's a lesson for my lunaship. What lesson could this possibly teach? He asked, his voice thick. That strength isn't about being unbreakable. It's about adapting, leading with what you have, not mourning what you've lost. I managed a small smile. I may have to learn to do things differently, to rely on my pack as they rely on me. He pulled me into a careful embrace, mindful of my arm. They will follow you into any fire, Elara. You have their loyalty, not because you are perfect, but because you are real, because you fight for them, even when it costs you. In the days that followed, I proved my words. I learned to manage tasks one-handed. I delegated more to the other Omegas in the pack, fostering their skills. In council, when an elder questioned my capability, I didn't cite my deeds. I simply asked, "Can your two hands soothe a fevered brow?" "Mine can." I lifted my living hand. "And this one," I touched my stone hand to my chest, "remembers the cost of peace, so we never take it for granted." The respect that grew was deeper than before. It was no longer the awe for a miraculous power, but the enduring loyalty for a leader who bore her scars without flinching. But the mystery of the petrifier lingered. Who was she? A lonely forest spirit twisted by fear? Or a weapon sent by a new, unseen enemy? The thought was a shadow in our newfound peace. The answer came from an unexpected source. Sailors, leading a patrol to ensure the Deepwood's full recovery, returned with an artifact. He laid it on the council table, a shard of the stone disk from the clearing, and embedded in it a small, intricately carved obsidian token in the shape of a coiled root. This was at the epicenter where she dissolved, Silas said. It's not natural to that forest. Theron picked it up, his face darkening. This is druidic craft, from the Greenwarden groves, beyond our southern borders. A cold understanding dawned. The Greenwardens were secretive, powerful druids who guarded ancient places. They were not enemies, but they were fiercely protective and saw the world in epochs, not generations. They wouldn't attack unprovoked, I said. Unless they saw us as a blight, Theron finished, his knuckles white around the token. A noisy, expanding lichen pack, disturbing the ancient silence of their sacred woods, which border the Deepwood Marches. The petrifier hadn't been a random monster. She had been a message, a drastic, horrific quarantine sent by powers who viewed our very existence as a contagion. And the message was clear: be silent or be stilled. My stone hand felt heavier than ever. The peace we had bought was fragile. And the next threat would not be a lone, twisted spirit, but an entire ancient order that saw the beating heart of our pack as a disease to be cured. The obsidian root token sat between us on the fur-covered table in our private chambers, a tiny, dark seed of a potential war. Theron paced, the restless energy of a wolf sensing a trap in every direction. The Greenwardens are not like the serpents, he said, thinking aloud. They are not evil, they are absolute. The balance of nature is their only law. If they perceive us as an imbalance, they will prune us without malice or mercy. I ran my living fingers over the cool, dead surface of my petrified hand. We cannot fight them. Not in their own ancient groves. Their magic is the magic of the living world itself. An army would be petrified or ensnared before it crossed their borders. Then what? Theron stopped, his frustration evident. We cannot be silent. A pack that does not howl is already dead. We don't have to be silent, I said, an idea beginning to form, fragile as a new shoot. We have to show them our noise is part of the balance, not a blight but a new note in the symphony. I looked at him. They sent a spirit of stillness to teach us a lesson. We must send an emissary of life to teach them one. His eyes narrowed. You. Who better? I have faced their perfection and bore its mark. I am the Luna, the heart. And I am an Omega healer. I speak the language of life, even if it's a different dialect than theirs. It is too dangerous. The words were automatic but lacked his usual kingly conviction. He was already weighing the strategy. All other paths lead to a war we cannot win, Theron, a war of attrition against the earth itself. This path has a chance for peace. I stood facing him. You told the council my fracture was a badge of honor. Let me use it. Let me show them the cost of their balance when applied without compassion. The debate raged within him, visible in the tension of his jaw, the clench of his fists. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath. You will not go alone, Silas and a minimal guard. And I will be at the border of their territory with every warrior I can muster. If a single leaf falls on you with hostile intent, you will tear down the grove. I finished softly, walking to him and placing my good hand on his chest. I know. But have faith in me, in our pack's right to live. The journey south was tense. The Greenwood groves were not marked on any map, but the token seemed to pull us, a cold compass leading to its source. The forest here was not silent like the petrifier's domain, but profoundly old. The trees were giants, their canopies forming a cathedral roof. The air hummed with a deep, green power. At the edge of a clearing where a pool of perfectly clear water reflected the ancient trees, they appeared. Figures clad in living moss and bark, faces ageless and stern. Their leader, a druid with hair like cascading willow fronds and eyes the green of deep shade, stepped forward. She held a staff of twisted heartwood. You bear the mark of the stillness, she said, her voice like wind through leaves, her eyes on my shrouded arm. And you carry our sigil of summoning. Why does the noisy pack send a wounded healer to our quiet places? I took a steadying breath, feeling the pulse of Theron's will across the miles, a steady drumbeat in my soul. I stepped forward, Silas and the guards holding back. I am Elara, Luna of the Stone Peak Pack. You sent the petrifier. We have come to return her message. I unwrapped the cloth from my stone hand, holding it up for them to see in the dappled light. This is the cost of perfect stillness. You sought to silence a perceived imbalance. You created suffering instead. The willow-haired druid's expression did not change. Life is suffering. We offer an end. You offer an illusion? I said, my voice ringing with a passion that made the druid stir. You stop the song because it may have a sad note. You freeze the stream because it may one day dry up. That is not balance. That is fear. I gestured to the vibrant, humming grove around us. True balance includes the wolf's howl and the rabbit's fear, the falling tree and the sprouting seed. It includes time, it includes us. I opened my empathy, not as a weapon, but as a demonstration. I projected not chaos, but the complex, beautiful tapestry of Stonepeak. The fierce love of warriors, the tender care of mothers, the playful yips of pups, the solemn duty of sentries, the deep, abiding bond between Theron and I. I showed them a pack not as a destructive force, but as a living, breathing part of the ecosystem. Hunting, nurturing, dying, being born. I showed them my stone hand, and through our bond, I let them feel the echo of Theron's anguish at its loss and my own determination to adapt. We bear our costs, we learn, we grow, that is life. Will you truly condemn an entire song for a note you dislike? The lead druid was silent for a long time, her deep green eyes seeing things beyond me. She looked at my stone hand, then at my living, earnest face. She looked at Silas and my guards, standing resolute, not threatening, but present. Finally, she tapped her staff on the ground. The pool beside her shimmered. In its surface, images flickered, our pack carefully culling only the sick and old from herds, our omegas planting groves of healing herbs. Thuron enforcing laws that protected denning grounds and water sources. You are louder than we prefer, the druid said, a faint, almost imperceptible softening at the corner of her mouth. But you are not a blight. The stillness was a drastic diagnosis. Perhaps we have been too long listening only to the oldest songs. She approached me. With a touch of her staff to my petrified hand, she spoke a word in a language of rustling leaves and flowing water. A warmth, the first I'd felt in that hand since the clearing, bloomed under the stone skin. It did not reverse the petrification. The flesh remained gray, the sensation absent. But the cold, dead feeling was gone, replaced by a gentle, ambient warmth, like stone warmed by the sun. The mark remains, she said, a reminder to you of the cost of action and to us of the cost of inaction. The stillness will not return. Your pack may sing its song, but sing it with respect for the older melodies that surround you. It was not a warm friendship offered. It was a wary, respectful truce, a recognition of coexistence. We will sing with respect, I vowed, bowing my head, and we will listen too. Returning to Theron at the border, the relief in his eyes when he saw me whole, save for the now warm stone hand, was a balm. I told him of the accord. So, we are tolerated, he said, a wry grin finally touching his lips. We are acknowledged, I corrected, taking his hand with my living one, as a valid part of the great story. That is all any of us can ask for. That night, back in Stone Peak, I stood with Theron on the battlements. Below, the pack lived, loved, and made their beautiful, noisy life. My stone hand rested on the sun-warmed stone of the parapet, no longer a wound, but a testament. It's not the ending I imagined, I said softly. Theron's arm slipped around my waist, pulling me close. Endings are overrated, my Luna, he murmured into my hair. This is a much better middle. And as the moon rose, we held together. A king, a Luna with a heart of flesh and a hand of stone, and a pack whose symphony, now heard and respected by the ancient world, would echo for generations to come. The end. Like the video, subscribe, kiss the bell icon, and comment part 2 if you want the story to continue.